This is the tale of a slugcat. First, it fell into a strange world, one with which it had no familiarity. Then it was helped by a strange creature that seemed to warn it about threats and inform it about food. This creature was known as an overseer, and while it did have an ulterior motive, it truly meant to help the slugcat. Eventually, this overseer, whose name was Iggy, led the slugcat to the iterator Looks to the Moon. While designed as a mighty computational device, Looks to the Moon's structure had collapsed, and much of their abilities had degraded. Unfortunately, the slugcat was unable to communicate with Looks to the Moon, and so was largely confused at the encounter. Iggy wanted the slugcat to go to a neighboring iterator and retrieve some of his neurons in order to ease the suffering of Looks to the Moon, whom Iggy had once served. The slugcat, knowing Iggy as a source of valuable information, followed their lead. Eventually, this led to the slugcat scaling the great superstructure of this being. And indeed, the slugcat met this being, this iterator. Their name was Five Pebbles, and they gave the slugcat valuable gifts, including the ability to communicate with iterators. This was what allowed the slugcat to communicate with the fallen iterator Looks to the Moon, and the slugcat admired the humility of this once godlike being. Thus it was decided that the slugcat would venture once more into the structure of Five Pebbles, to commit a great heist to the benefit of the noble but fallen iterator. Surprisingly, acquiring the neurons was quite easy. The only defense in place was the lack of gravity, and this proved to be only an inconvenience for the slugcat. However, the slugcat's journey was far from over. Now that they had these neurons, they still needed to carry them to Looks to the Moon, which would not be an easy trip. The slugcat had to climb through the treacherous underhang, dodge the rot in the leg, avoid the snapping Miros birds in the dark memory crypts, navigate the pitch-black shaded citadel, and only then would they be close to their goal. But this had to be done one step at a time, and the first step was to make it out of the underhang. Part 1. The Underhang. The underhang was, well, the underside of Five Pebbles' superstructure. But I'm going to take a brief moment to deviate from the dramatic tone, because there's this one room here, alright, that, look, it's just terrible, okay? There's this jump that you have to make, where you have to rapidly switch from going down and then holding up to grab onto the pipe. And so much of the time it just doesn't work. And then there's a daddy longlegs in the room as well, which seems to just always know where you are, because of course it does. And it's a really frustrating room, and I had a lot of failed attempts there. And yeah, it was frustrating. Anyway, back to the dramatic story, you know. Alright. At any rate, the slugcat eventually managed to make its way across this treacherous gap, and despite a close call with a particularly aggressive creature of the rot, it managed to make it to a shelter at the top of the leg. Part 2. The Leg. With this first step complete, the slugcat needed merely to descend to the memory crypts. This would not be so simple, however. The monstrous creatures of the rot, known as daddy longlegs, had infested the leg, in addition to its native populations of the camouflaged white lizards. These, in addition to the constant threat of simply slipping and falling, would prove considerable obstacles. Also, this happened. Eventually, through a combination of daring, luck, and patience, the slugcat made their way down the leg and was ready to begin the next stage of their journey, the memory crypts. Part 3. Memory crypts. At first, the slugcat did not see the memory crypts as being much of an obstacle. After all, they had previously traversed its barren plain without much difficulty. However, they did not account for the renewed ferocity of the Miros birds, and found the journey to be significantly more difficult than expected. It took several attempts for the Slugcat to succeed in traversing the memory crypts, even with one of the neurons, by which point I had remembered something rather important. Okay, so picking up where we left off, apparently, if you eat a neuron, you become permanently glowy. I didn't know that. So I could have gone through Shaded Citadel with both neuron flies and been relatively okay. Oh well. I mean, I'm here now. This was somewhat frustrating, but the Slugcat persevered nonetheless, making the long journey back through the memory crypts several times more until, at long last, they had succeeded at getting both neurons through the Mirrorspurt-infested wasteland. Part 4. Shaded Citadel. Now, however, came the most difficult part of the journey, or at least the most tense, the Shaded Citadel. Its foes were numerous and devilish in their sophistication. The first that the Slugcat would encounter was the monster kelp. This creature existed in the partially flooded underbelly of the Citadel, and whenever it sensed movement, it struck out. If it were to grab the Slugcat, it would surely drag it to the depths below. Fortunately, the Slugcat had a plan. The monster kelp, like most living things, was not fond of being stabbed. Therefore, the Slugcat's plan was simple. Throw a spear into the beast, and run past before it had recovered. There turned out to be a small flaw with this plan, namely, that there was a severe deficit of spears in the area. With the help of a strange and arcane source of information, the wiki, the Slugcat discovered that it was possible to simply sneak past the monster kelp by moving slowly. With this knowledge, the attempts of the Slugcat to sneak by the monster kelp sped up significantly, and the two neurons were successfully moved to the next shelter. The threats faced by the Slugcat in the rest of the Citadel were small by comparison. While the coalescipedes were always frightening, they rarely gathered in sufficient numbers to cause real harm to the Slugcat. The occasional lizard was also a danger, but the Slugcat had long practice evading, and when necessary even killing these foes. In truth, the Citadel had only one more significant obstacle. A room that contained a black lizard, a creature that had lost the ability to see, relying instead on a keen sense of hearing. A final piece of monster kelp, and occasionally something skittering about in the darkness. As always, the Slugcat devised a strategy to outwit their foes. They would lure the unfortunate lantern mice into the room, and, when possible, into the grip of the monster kelp. While the kelp devoured the unfortunate creature, the Slugcat would run past, into the next room. The lizard could be avoided relatively simply. If the Slugcat moved quietly, it would pose little danger. As for the skittering thing in the dark, well, the Slugcat had only hope that it would not be present when it moved through the chamber. It took several attempts, and the abandonment of the strategy of feeding lantern mice to the kelp, as it proved unreliable. But eventually, even this chamber was overcome. The Slugcat had merely to repeat this feat 3 more times while not falling off the bridge that led to the shoreline. Definitely didn't happen. I'm good at video games, I promise. Didn't happen, alright? And then they were free of the oppressive darkness of the Citadel. Part 5. Shoreline. From here, the remainder of the journey was a walk in the park, by comparison at any rate. While the Slugcat did have to discover a path from this previously unknown gate, this was accomplished with relative ease. Soon they were on their way through more familiar territory, needing only to dodge the playful jetfish and the monstrous leviathan. It was then a simple climb up a short ledge, and the Slugcat arrived in the collapsed structure of Looks to the Moon. As the Slugcat finally approached the Iterator, after hours and hours and many deaths, the Slugcat wasn't sure what to think. It had finally reached its goal, but what now? It approached the Iterator with some trepidation, wondering if it had done the right thing in making this long and treacherous journey. It began speaking with the Iterator, who told a tale of the past. Hey there. Hello, little friend. What are you? If I had my memories, I would know. Perhaps I saw you before? You must be very brave to have made it all the way here, but I'm sorry to say your journey here is in vain. As you can see, I have nothing for you, not even my memories. Aw, or did I say that already? I see that someone has given you the gift of communication. Must have been Five Pebbles, as you don't look like you can travel very far. He's sick, you know, being corrupted from the inside by his own experiments. Maybe they all are by now, who knows. We weren't designed to transcend, and it drives us mad. It is good to have someone to talk to after all this time. The scavengers aren't exactly good listeners. They do bring me things, though, occasionally. I am grateful. The relief is indescribable. I could read a bit of Five Pebbles in this neuron before formatting it. His condition has severely deteriorated since last I heard of him. The frustration he feels is profound, and that angst has seeped into every part of him, every neuron. We were supposed to help everyone, you know, everything. That was our purpose, a great gift to the lesser beings of the world. When facing our inability to do so, we all reacted differently, many with madness. Some out there might still be trying. Communications have been bad for a long time, and by now I suspect most of us are isolated like me, or connected only in small groups. But even back when we were all more or less connected, there were those who reacted to their task with anger. I can only imagine they are angrier now, alone in their cans, left only with their insatiable drive. But to be honest, I don't know how many of us are still alive at this point. You get these at Five Pebbles? Thank you so much, I'm sure he won't mind. Or actually, I'm sure he would, but he has so many of these, it doesn't do him any difference. For me, though, it does. Thank you, little creature. With its conversation with the looks to the moon at an end, the Slugcat returned to the nearest shelter. It had completed its great quest, but now found itself at a loss for what to do next. It could continue to explore, to attempt to find a way back to its family it had lost so long ago. But another alternative had presented itself. When it had spoken with the Iterator Five Pebbles, the Iterator had mentioned that there was a path, far to the west, that could lead to some sort of ascension. This was what the Slugcat ultimately decided upon. But that is a story for another time. Probably it's going to come out next week if I can edit it in time. Next Wednesday. That's the plan. Subscribe if you want to see it. Okay, bye!